Hello, I'm just letting you all in. We'll try and start at 6:05. I know some people have a hard time getting here. So I do think we'll have some new people in class tonight, which is exciting. And it's lovely to see you again, Mary.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry I missed last week.
Oh, it happens. And I think Ron shared the email. We are putting these online. So if you do, I can always shoot that. I'll make a note actually.
I watched it.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I was just about to say, hopefully people are getting that link.
I'm up to speed. Yes.
Great. I mean, there's no quizzes, so.
Right. I was so sorry that I missed it. I was ready to talk about Romeo and Juliet.
I know it's a great show. Hopefully we're covering some fun topics. Well, I think they're fun. We're covering some more fun topics tonight, so we'll see. But I didn't get another person. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I had such a tiny class when this started, and then I've been getting more people to join, so I'm thrilled. So as I said, we're gonna probably start around 5. I always do that 6:35 because of the fun time change. And we're just gonna kind of wait. So I will pose my favorite question to everyone while we wait for some others to join us. If you were feeling like a Shakespearean character today or tonight, what Shakespearean character might you be feeling like? I will say that today I'm feeling a little bit like Prospero. It was a busy day. I had lots of things and I made sure they were all orchestrated to perfection. So I'm going to say that I feel like Prospero today. Does anybody else want to contribute? This is, it's not necessary, but it's fun.
Well, this might not be a good one to admit, but I'm feeling like Goneril today.
Oh, all right. King Lear.
I've been taking care of my mother, who's 93, and she's ailing. And it's just so weird to see this. She was a very powerful, dynamic woman and big personality. And to see the change is really strange. And it really gives me a different avenue into King Lear.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm actually, so I'm very thrilled that I'll be headed out to the East Coast in March and I get to see STC's Shakespeare Theater Company's King Lear with Patrick Page. And I am very excited.
Yes, I'm going to go see that.
Well, perfect. Oh my gosh. If we have, I think I might ask you some questions in our follow-up class because I think we'll both have seen it by then.
Did you go see, I'm sorry, I don't want to monopolize the discussion, but did you go see As You Like It there? I mean, Much About Nothing.
Yes. So I'm very fortunate that I have family that lives in Washington, D.C. So I do get to pop over there every once in a while. And so I also, the same trip that I get to see King Lear, I also get to see the matinee performance for this one. So I'm be able to talk about Romeo and Juliet. Last time we had to send my poor brother to go see 12th Night, but he did a great job reporting back to me. But yes, I did get to see There Much Ado About Nothing. Did you see that one as well?
Yes, I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yes, I think I mentioned in the last class, I'm a huge fan of Simon's work. So, and I do sprinkle in his Romeo and Juliet throughout the course of this class as well. So, so I'm excited to see more of it. Yeah. But we still have a bit of time before, like I said, we have that 5-minute buffer. So anybody else who's feeling like a Shakespearean character, you're more than welcome to share.
I was just going to say, I loved That Much Ado. I thought it was so funny. It was just, the setting was so brilliantly conceived. I loved it.
I was very fortunate enough that I got to see it because I got there and it was during Tech Week. I was going to see their first preview and things were not going well. So the night of the show that I was supposed to see, they canceled. And then I just changed my flights so that I could see the show the next day because I didn't want to miss it. Because it was quite tech heavy because they used all those screens and the technology for That Much Ado. So I'm glad they got it working. I could tell though, there was a hiccup with part of the technology and I was like, I bet that's what they were trying to fix the night before. Shakespeare characters. Don't, like I said, I'm not going to force anybody. All right.
Possibly Orsino.
Okay.
Just because woman who is very dear to me called me out of the blue yesterday and said, you know, I've got a new boyfriend. And I was like, oh, that really came out of the blue. So I'm feeling a little Orsino, but
all right. Well, you know, the themes of love, I think we can take some of that into class. We do touch on the language of love today. So a little fitting for today's class. All right. And then let's see. Great. Hello. All right, we'll give it one more minute. But I'm glad I waited. And Anastasia, I do notice that you have Stacy. Would you prefer that?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself.
Of course.
Fine, but Stacy's much shorter and it's fine.
Well, I will make a note for Stacy. All right, well, we're at 5:35, so I'm going to start with some roll call here. And we have Stacy, which is great. I see Courtney's joined us, which is wonderful. We have Mary with us tonight, which is great. I see Miss Nancy is with us. And then Wally as well.
Yeah, I managed to change the caption.
I was going to say, but you know, I was ready to call you Potato this week as well. So, all right. So that's, if anybody, and then Jeff, I see you weren't on my list, but I see that you are with us here. So I'm going to mark that down. They send me an updated list. I don't always get them in time, so that's no problem. We're always happy to have people join us.
I apologize. I registered late, so I missed last week's class, but I do have the recording, so I'll watch that at some point.
All right, perfect. And, you know, as I was telling Mary, I'm not going to quiz you. Feel free to watch them, but I promise there will be no pop quizzes. So without further ado, we'll just get started on class. There are a few things I'm going to talk about before we get started. I wanted to remind those of you that had signed up that in addition to our classes, we do get that free admission to see Chesapeake's student matinee production of Romeo and Juliet. So I do all encourage you to reach out to Troy if you want to get those tickets set up, because then we do have that break and then we come back to discuss the show. So if you can see it, it's great. I know sometimes it doesn't always work with our schedules, but I just want to remind you all that you can get those tickets. And then I did want to also say, as a few of you have mentioned, we have those wonderful recordings up on YouTube that you can watch so you can keep up with the class even if you can't make it. But I did want to just let everybody know that, you know, I am recording. And as I say that, I'm double checking, I am recording. And so these will be on YouTube. So if you prefer to, you know, just have your name on the screen or whatever, because we're putting them up, that's totally fine. I completely understand. But I also love seeing your faces. So it's whatever you're comfortable with. So that was kind of the business element of today. And we've done our perfect roll call. So without further ado, we're going to jump on into things and I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint. And if anybody has questions, again, feel free to let me know. I try to check the chat. I know, I'll admit, I'm not always great at it. All right. And I am going to put the Folger PDF version in the chat again today. You can follow along if you like, but it's not required. All right, so that's in there for everyone. And now we shall get started. So today we are going to be covering the topic of language, as well as looking at the theme of fate in Romeo and Juliet. So language, we're going to cover a bunch of various topics within that in that topic today. So we'll be looking at the various elements of language that appear throughout the play. And I'll say that when performing or even just reading the play, I find the language can be very helpful. It can help us to figure out our relationships between characters. Shakespeare gives us such wonderful context within his plays and scenes that these linguistic clues help us to further build up off of what he's already provided. And as I said, as a performer, I find this very helpful. I rely on the language of Shakespeare's plays for a majority of my character choices and how I'll interact with others. So first we have our prose and verse and prose. So 88% of Romeo and Juliet is written in verse, with 17% of that verse being in rhyme, and the remaining 12% of the play is in prose. So therefore, the majority of the show is in verse. Many of Shakespeare's earlier plays relied heavily on verse. So what is verse? Verse is the form of speech that is typically used by upper class or noble characters in Shakespeare's plays. Shakespeare uses what we call blank verse. That means it doesn't have a rhyme, or it doesn't typically rhyme, though we know he does rhyme occasionally. And we will take a look at that later. But each line has an internal rhythm with a regular rhythmic pattern. And I'm sure that we all know that the pattern Shakespeare most favored is iambic pentameter. So then what is prose? Prose is the form of speech that is usually used by common people in Shakespeare's plays, though it can be used by those of higher status as well. There is no rhyme or meter in the line. It's considered everyday language. And so the breakdown of verse and prose among the characters in Romeo and Juliet is very interesting. And so I'm going to call your attention to the chart that I have up here on the PowerPoint. So on the left-hand side, we have the characters who speak more than 50% verse. And then here on the right-hand side, we have characters who speak less than 50% verse. And so what we find interesting about that is that by looking at the table, we can see that there is a class and social status has an influence on whether a character uses verse or prose. Juliet, Lord Capulet, Lady Capulet, Prince Escalus, Paris, Lord Montague, Lady Montague, Romeo, Benvolio, and Tybalt all use verse when they speak, whereas our servant type characters like Peter, Samson, Abraham, Anthony, Gregory, and additional ensemble-based characters, let's not forget our unnamed servants and 3 musicians, this group largely uses prose when they speak, as they are of lower status. So why do we think that might be? Sorry, checking the chat. Oh, that's a great question from Stacy about how common iambic pentameter is used in poetry / prose. So that's an interesting, I'll answer that real quick. Shakespeare heavily used, it depends on his writing style. He drifted in and out throughout the years that he did write. And during certain periods of time, a lot of his poetry or the verse that higher characters spoke or those that spoke first did use a lot of iambic pentameter. And it's not used as much in that everyday speech. However, the editors have found when they have to go through and edit some of his work that even the prose sometimes actually has that natural beat because he used it so often. So it's really interesting that as an actor, as a writer, he used it a lot, and sometimes it was just innately inherent in his work. And so editors have found when they go through things, they're like, this isn't iambic pentameter, but it fits really well. And so, and again, there are those time periods where with his poetry, with the verse, he really kept with iambic pentameter. And then there's other plays that you don't see it, that internal beat as much, or, you know, he's playing with various variations. The supernatural characters tend to use, I think it's pentameter. I'll have to look that up, but they tend to use a different beat that he also used at that time. So I hope that answers your question. But why do we think we have this some interesting, if we look over here, we have a few characters, as I said, that might be considered servant types that have high use of a percentage of verse. And then we also have, as I highlighted here, I have the nurse and Mercutio kind of differ. And why do we think those characters might differ? Oh, Wally, I see you speaking, but I think you're muted. Oh, hold on, you're still muted. There we go.
No, I was just putting in my AirPods because
Oh,
my
okay.
wife's here, and she's getting ready to leave to go to choir practice. So I thought, well, I'll put these in, and then if she wants to holler goodbye, I'm not
No
interrupting
problem.
class.
Well, then I shall answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
In those differences, serious and emotionally charged topics are often delivered in verse. And so Balthazar the page, Friar John the apothecary, and the three watchmen only appear in the final act. And this act revolves around the aftermath of Juliet's supposed death and the multiple tragic events that follow. In his book, Language and Characterization, author Jonathan Culpeper explains the tragedies are racked with torments of guilt, bereavement, misplaced trust, passionate love, and so on. In Shakespeare, verse is the vehicle for such topics. Poetry is often used to highlight those strong emotions. So then, what about our nurse? The nurse speaks a high amount of verse for a servant. In comparison to those she works for, the nurse is of lower status. But she is the senior servant and much respected. And I think we can agree that if we look at her personality, one could say she is full of her own self-importance. And so that explains her high use of verse. So then what about Mercutio? He speaks about half of his dialogue in prose. Prose is commonly used for lesser subject matter than verse and for comic dialogue. As for Mercutio, we know he is a character of status, but he often uses prose when making jokes, and especially when being provocative. So here's a quick tip. There's a visual distinction that can help distinguish between prose and verse. In many publications, prose runs continuously from margin to margin, while the verse is set out in a narrow block neatly aligned on the left side, and all the lines begin with capital letters. And so we can see this here. This is a picture from one of the folios. I picked Hamlet. And so we can see here verse, everything starts with a capital, and it's about half of the page. And if we go over here, we can see that continuously running across. So that can be a visual indication if you're reading a script as well to see who's speaking what. That can be very helpful if you can't always find that beat as well. So why might characters switch between verse and prose? The switch from prose to verse or verse to prose indicates a switch to the actor, and it indicates a mental shift. So what might be happening that would create that shift? Does anybody have any thoughts? Yes, Mary.
Maybe something bad is happening or something emotional is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So that make them switch from prose into verse.
Yes. Any other thoughts about those switches? Oh, that's all right. So as I said, it's important to ask why this change has occurred. So let us look at Mercutio in Act 3, Scene 1. In this scene, we observe switches from verse to prose and vice versa. Mercutio is unpredictable. He starts the scene in prose and slips in and out of meter at will. Shakespeare uses the variance of prose and verse at his disposal to change and match the mood of the scene. Through his verbal movement, Shakespeare indicates Mercutio's impulsive and unpredictable temperament. He seems impossible to define or pin down. This further stresses the mood of the scene as well, with the impulsive and shifting nature of the fight between Mercutio and Tybalt. Additionally, the play often restores order with the use of verse to scenes of violence that are using prose. Importantly, Romeo only ever addresses Juliet in verse, and vice versa. And except for one line, Juliet speaks the entirety of the play in verse. And her prose line occurring in Act 1, Scene 3, how now, who calls? A very simple question. Do we have any questions for prose and verse before I move on to rhyming couplets? All right, rhyming couplets it is. And so we did watch this scene last class, but we have some new people, and so I'm gonna play it again. It highlights the beautiful use of those rhyming couplets.
What lady is that which doth enrich the hand of yonder knight? I know not, sir. She doth teach the torches to burn bright. Seeing she hangs upon the cheek of night as a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear, beauty too rich for use, rare too dear. So shines a snow white dove, trooping with crows, as yonder lady o'er her fellows shows. The measure done, I'll watch her place of stand, and touching hers, make blessed my rude hand. Did my heart love demand? Or swear it sight, I never saw true beauty till this night. This by his voice should be a
Rhyming couplets are two successive lines of verse where the final words rhyme with one another. These are most often used at the end of scenes and by characters expressing their love. Many characters use rhyming couplets to finish thoughts and speeches in Romeo and Juliet. For example, Romeo uses them in speeches when he is talking about Juliet. When he first sees Juliet in Act 1, Scene 5, his speech is written entirely in rhyming couplets. And we watch that now. And as we can see, or hear, I suppose, we have bright, night, ear, dear, crows, shows, stand, hand, sight, night. The play also ends. There we go. The play also ends with a rhyming couplet, Prince Aeschylus, for never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo. Shakespeare often used rhyming couplets to signal the end of phrase of action. Furthermore, rhyming couplets highlight and emphasize strong emotions and stress important points throughout the play. Rhyme can work as an auditory signal, and often the words with the most important meaning are those that rhyme at the end of lines. This helps an audience notice and grasp the meaning of lines. Rhyming couplets feel like a complete thought on their own, and whenever we see or hear them in the text, they really stick out, calling attention to themselves. They act like a period at the end of a sentence. In Act 1, Scene 5, Romeo and Juliet share a rhyming couplet. Juliet, saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake. Romeo, then move not while my prayers effect, I take, sake, take. A shared couplet typically means a couple is in sync or suggests mutual attraction. And this line comes at the end of a sonnet that the lovers had crafted together. So now for sonnets. The play also opens with a sonnet spoken by the chorus, the prologue.
This is not just a deck of cards. This is a collection of 54 beautiful
two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured piteous overthrows do with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage.
The 14-line sonnet form was most commonly used for love poems. It originated in the 13th century in Italy and was imported to England in the 16th century. In his lifetime, Shakespeare was well known as a poet as well as a playwright, and he published a collection of sonnets in 1609. According to the Poetry Foundation website, the variation of the sonnet form that Shakespeare used comprised of 3 quatrains and a concluding couplet, rhyming AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, and that final couplet, GG. This is called the English or Shakespearean sonnet form, although others did use this form before him. It is thought that this different sonnet structure allows for more space to be devoted to and build up of a subject or problem, in comparison to the Italian or Petrarchan form, and is followed by just 2 lines to conclude or resolve the poem in that rhyming couplet. I think the most famous sonnet in the play is the one in Act 1, Scene 5, when Romeo and Juliet meet. Their first words uttered to each other form a sonnet on which they collaborate. On which they collaborate. The introduction to the art and performance edition of Romeo and Juliet explains, this represents a major innovation on Shakespeare's part, since sonnets are traditionally solo acts, most often written or spoken by a male lover to an absent beloved. It is unusual that this sonnet is shared by 2 people, but it still follows the set rules, ending with that couplet which Romeo and Juliet share. So let us take a look at Romeo and Juliet's shared sonnet.
The thing that's different about a Virgo vacation home, you always have the whole
Think.
If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle vine is this, my lips. 2 blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch, a tender kiss.
Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much. Which manly devotion shows in this? Saints have hands, pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss.
Saints' lips, holy palmers too.
I, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer.
Oh then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair.
Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake.
Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take. Thus from my lips, by yours, my sin is purged.
And have my lips the sin that they have took.
O trespass sweetly urged, give me my sin again.
Madam, you must.
This is the sonnet where Romeo and Juliet meet and fall in love, and the sonnet structure reinforces the idea of love at first sight. It is thought that within the 14 lines of a classical sonnet, the poet is challenged to compact a powerful emotion that must deepen or change during the course of the sonnet. The following is an explanation from Kristen Linkletter that I have made some edits to for clarity. The final words in the line leap out both as rhymes and signs. Hand, stand, this, kiss. Romeo says, much, touch, this, kiss. Answers Juliet. To, says Romeo. Prayer, says Juliet. Do, cries Romeo. Then despair, sake, offers Juliet. And Romeo responds with take. In the first 4 lines, Romeo approaches with a sense of humor and of trespass. He sees Juliet as divine and knows that he is unworthy. Let us remember, he has been afflicted with impure thoughts about Rosaline. Within the first 4 lines, he tells Juliet he wants to kiss her hand. Entering into the form and language he has initiated, Juliet tells him he has gone far enough already. This kiss, she says, of hands touching hands, is perfectly appropriate to saints and pilgrims. Juliet's 4 lines put the young woman on an equal footing with the young man. Romeo has been rebuffed. The next 6 lines bring him onto a deeper level of feeling, and he begs for her lips to touch his lips. Romeo states, have not saints lips and holy palmers too? This line is enough, ending on a plaintive to, rising in a question. She keeps him at arm's length for 1 more line, telling him he must ask with the heartfelt fervor of prayer before she can trust him. His next rhyme is a firm do, as he draws her attention to the touch of their hands and tells her that when their lips touch, she will understand that prayer is sensation. His final appeal comes from the recesses of his soul. Grant thou lest faith turn to despair. Her word, prayer, elicited the rhyme, and in the ringing of its truth, she hears his love. Thank you, Kristen Linkletter. Romeo and Juliet share the final couplet. Juliet, saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake. Romeo, then move not while my prayer's effect I take. The couple is unified in verse. The final couplet resolves and seals their love with a kiss. After their kiss, they share an additional 4 lines. Thus from my lips by thine my sin is purged. Then have my lips the sin that they have took. Sin from my lips, O trespass sweetly urged. Give me my sin again. You kiss by the book. Both the Oxford and Folger note a second kiss after give me my sin again. The continued rhyming in these additional 4 lines and the possible second kiss highlights the passion between Romeo and Juliet, as well as suggests that their love will evolve. It cannot be contained by form. When a character speaks using a rhyming couplet, they have chosen to make a point in a poetic fashion. The rhyme highlights the point the character is making, with rhyme primarily being the language of love. All right, wonderful. I'm just admitting somebody else into our group. Hello. Right. Go on from there. The rhyme shows from the very beginning Romeo and Juliet's fitness for each other, with poetry functioning as a kind of shared language. So now on to consonants and vowels. Vowels can be seen as the emotional occurrence in word construction. They release emotion. Consonants are thought to be the intellectual component, clarifying thought. Kristen Linkletter further explains in her book, Freeing Shakespeare's Voice, that consonants are formed by the closure or near closure of some part of the mouth, creating an explosive, reverberating, buzzing, or liquid sound with breath or vibration. Because of the direct and uninterrupted connection with the breath source, vowels can be directly connected with emotion. Let us take a look at Act 1, Scene 1. This is a conversation between Abraham, a Montague servant, and Samson, a Capulet servant. Do you bite your thumb at us, sir? I do bite my thumb, sir. Do you bite your thumb at us, sir? No, sir, I do not bite my thumb at you, sir, but I bite my thumb, sir. So what sounds do we hear? Yes, Mary, you're still on mute, but I see your raised hand.
You hear the S a lot.
Yes. And then Stacy, did you pick up any other sounds?
I was just thinking about all the T's, you know, the
Yeah,
bite.
yes, bite. You have those T's and S's. We also have those do you and bite. So we have some strong D's and B's exploding as well. The T sound seems to emulate a spitting. Similarly, the S sound could be described as snake-like. In this scene, there is an interesting repetition of the B, T, and S consonants exploding from our lips like modern-day expletives. Shakespeare has provided us with a violent soundscape where characters spit, hiss, and fire their words at each other. This helps us deduce the relationship between the Montagues and Capulets is not a pleasant one.
Here comes the house of Capulet. Coral, I will back thee.
I will bite my thumb at them, which is a disgrace to them if they bear it. Huh?
Go forth, I will back thee! Do you bite your thumb at us, sir? I do bite my thumb, sir! Do you bite your thumb at us? Sir. Is love our side if I say I? No! No, sir, I do not bite my thumb at you, sir, but I bite my thumb, sir! Do you quarrel, sir? Quarrel, son? No, son! But if you do, sir, and for you I serve as good a man as you! No better? Here comes our kinsman, say, better! Yes, sir, back it alive! George, you be mine! What fools, you don't know what you do! Put up your swords!
That's from the 1996 movie. So even in that clip, we hear those strong S's as they shout at each other across, our gas station pumps. And so even in this modern day clip, we have that reinforced spitting or anger coming from them. So the next line we're going to look at is the line from one of the lines from the balcony scene. "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" So just in that line, what are the sounds that we hear in comparison to this scene?
It's all O's.
It's all O's. It's a lot more vowel heavy than our consonant heavy previous scene. And so with those O's, we hear an expressiveness. This sound could be associated with romance and has a suggestiveness to it. The soundscape of just this line is one of love and longing. And so that's our consonants and vowels that Shakespeare has helped us paint those scenes with. And now we have you and thou. And yes, we're going to do you and thou. I'm checking my time because I know I've shared a lot of language and we're all digesting it. So you and thou. During Shakespeare's time, the use of you and thou highlighted distinctions in social status and relationships. Switching between them, much like the shift between verse and prose, indicated a change in dynamic. So here are some of the meanings behind you and thou. If you were using you, the upper class used you to each other as a rule, even when they were closely related. You was standard in married couples, and the use of you conveyed respect and formality. It was usual for you to be used by inferiors to superiors, such as children to parents or servants to masters. And thou would then often be used in return. You forms include you, your, yours, yourself, and yourselves. On to thou. Forms of thou include thee, thine, thy, and prithee. Thou marks a special affection. It's considered the lover's pronoun. It is also used among close friends and family members. Thou was used when someone of a higher status addressed someone of a lower status. It can signal a loss of control. Thou is considered the emotional pronoun. And there is a potential role for the word thou to be used as an insult. Changing from thou to you or you to thou in a conversation always conveys a contrast in meaning, a change of attitude, or an altered relationship. At a basic level, thou means closer and you means distance. Again, it's important for us to ask ourselves why a character is getting closer or creating that distance. Throughout the play, from the balcony scene on, you and thou use between our star couple, Romeo and Juliet, follows the literary convention of mutual lovers, with that shared usage of thou forms. Author Penelope Friedman further discusses, Romeo and Juliet, though beset by external threats, are unwavering in the intensity of their mutual love. That this consistent mutual thee was a literary convention for true lovers is supported by the fact that Shakespeare gives this same use to the lovers in Pyramus and Thisbe, the play in A Midsummer Night's Dream, which was believed to be written about the same time. The use of thou forms shows that Romeo and Juliet's love is consistent, shared, and true. Romeo and Juliet are unwavering in their love for each other, and it is this steadfast love that makes their fate so tragic. The only exception to this shared use of thee is when Romeo leaves for Mantua, his line stating, "And trust me, love in my eyes so you do. Dry sorrow drink our blood, adieu, adieu." But I think we all can notice, as we talked about rhyming couplets, that you and adieu rhyme. Creating that rhyming couplet was another way to express love. So even though he's leaving, creating that distance, we still have that beautiful rhyming couplet to symbolize their love. Additionally, Romeo uses this as he exiles. As we said, that's creating that distance. So I find this line to be extremely clever in Shakespeare's language usage. But what about other characters and how they use you and thou? Let us take a look at Act 3, Scene 5, when Juliet defies her parents over her proposed marriage to Paris. For context, at this time, there was a book called Instruction of a Christian Woman, and it was written by Juan Luis Vives. It was originally written in 1523, but translated from Latin into English around 1557. It was a popular book at the time and provided moral and practical guidance on all aspects of a woman's life, including marriage. And this is a quote from the book. "It becometh not a maid to talk, where her father and mother be in communication about her marriage. The marriage decisions were thought best to be left to the parents. This is the argument we see in Romeo. This is the arrangement, we see in Romeo and Juliet. But Juliet disagrees, and so we have our conflict. In this scene, Lord and Lady Capulet exchange forms of you with each other, and this is in contrast with the angry forms of thee that they use with their daughter. Here are a few lines from the scene. Lady Capulet, "Aye, sir, but she will none. She gives you thanks. I would the fool were married to her grave." Lord Capulet, "Soft, take me with you. Take me with you, wife." Lady Capulet, "Fie, fie, what are you mad?" Juliet, "Good father, I beseech you on my knees, hear me with patience, but to speak a word." Capulet, "Hang thee, young baggage, disobedient wretch. I tell thee what, get thee to church, O Thursday." And at the end of the scene, Lady Capulet states this to Juliet, "Talk not to me, for I'll not speak a word. Do as thou wilt, for I have done with thee." Here, I've highlighted that the thou used by Lord and Lady Capulet towards Juliet. Here, I've highlighted the use of thou used by Lord and Lady Capulet towards Juliet. But in the entirety of the scene, Lord and Lady Capulet fluctuate between you and thou with their daughter. Why do we think this might be? Any thoughts?
I think in that case, the thou is probably to emphasize that they have control of the situation. That Juliet is not their peer. That as a member of the household, she has to follow her father's wishes to go and marry Paris.
Yes. So in this scene, we have that lower status. She's not on equal footing, where we have the parents, as you said, using the respectful you towards each other. We have, if you want to call it the disrespectful thee. And as I said, it can be used to show anger, which I think we would agree that Capulet in this scene is not pleased with Juliet. Any other thoughts why we have that strong thee use, or why the parents, Lord Capulet specifically, might switch between the you and thou usage in this scene? That's okay.
That's when he switches when he's talking to Juliet between you and,
Yes.
yeah, but maybe he's equivocal too, you know, he doesn't want to condemn his daughter. He wasn't real ready for Paris to marry her right away anyway. Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful point. I think if there's certainly, there can be, I think the you and thou use there can show a struggle of, you know, how do I feel about this topic? How do I feel about my daughter in this moment? I think it can also be used as like those cooling down periods, you know, where he's like calming down and we have that you usage, and then he heats back up and we see those these. So I think those are all really excellent points that kind of help us to see that relationship dynamic between Juliet and her father in this scene. And one of my favorite things is that as an actor, there's actually an acting exercise where the actors will move forward on every thee, and then they will move back with every you that has been spoken. Oh, I have a hand raised. Yes, Elise, do you want to jump on in here?
I just have I have a question, just something. Sorry, I couldn't get my video started.
No, you're fine.
I just wanted to clarify something that I'm sorry, I apologize for coming in late. And
no, not at all.
I'm not sure if I heard you correctly. And then I had an actual question.
Of course.
That ties into what someone else said about control. Did you say the use of thou means that the relationship is closer?
So when I say closer, I mean, it can be physically close as a way of you getting closer to someone. And so you're creating that closure. So that's when I say close, I'm thinking back to the acting exercise that we do where and I'll use the term invading space. And so when I say that, I always ask the question, why are you invading someone's space? Are you invading someone's space because you're really, really angry at them? And so you're using thee and thou as an insult, or are you invading that space because, you actually care about them and there's an affectionate quality? So thee kind of has that double edge to it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great. And then what was your other question?
My other question had to do with this scene between Capulet and Juliet in some ways remind me of the scene with Tybalt and Capulet. And I was just curious if the language used was the same when he gets trying to regain, I guess, or establish control with Tybalt when Tybalt
yes,
him. So I was just curious if the language was the same of the use.
You know what? Let me pull up the script and let's just take a look, because we can do that. Because I do believe he uses thou with Tybalt. What is one of the lines in that one? He calls Tybalt something. I actually addressed this in our next class or in the following one. So I'm trying to think of one of the lines in that scene. Does anybody know a line from that scene? My mind is going blank. Or what scene is that?
It's Act 1, Scene 5, the party scene.
Thank you. I was like, if we find the act, I can find it. Act 1, Scene 5, you said?
I'm pretty sure, because that's when Romeo
take a look.
Juliet for the first time.
Yes.
And then it's right after Tybalt recognizes Romeo by voice.
Yes.
And then I think Capulet says something to the effect of like, why are you like something about his face or something?
Yeah, he calls Tybalt out and says, "Don't make trouble."
Yeah, he calls him. He calls him like a princox and a cockatoo or something like that.
He uses the word boy. I know he uses the word boy. All right. Yes, here we go. Yes, Montague, our foe. Yes, it is my will, the which if thou respect, shows a fair presence and puts off these frowns, an ill beseeming semblance for a feast. And then we have, he shall be endured. What a good man, boy. I say he shall go to. I am the master here, or you go to. You'll not endure him. God shall mend my soul. And so he switched back to that polite form, but in the first bit, he does show that anger with the thou, and then their conversation continues.
He's like, you'll make a mutiny among my guests. You will set
Yep.
a cock, you'll be the man.
Yes.
Yeah, then it continues. It's all you after that.
Yes, that's always a really fun question if you're an actor and you're looking at these scenes, because then at the same time that I said that, there's that closeness, it's always within that context as well. So you bring a really good point where I think we can argue that Capulet at that first thou that he uses shuts Tybalt down. He says, nope, I don't want you to disrespect me. I'm shutting you down. I'm, diminishing you. And then Tybalt kind of continues, but we also know that Capulet doesn't want to cause a scene. And so there's also a forced politeness because he doesn't want to cause the scene at the party. And so I think with that context, that's also why we get the continued you use as well. But you also, as I said, you have the these and thous, and those are creating and invading space, and those yous create distance. So there's that polite distance that they're holding from each other. He doesn't want to get close to Tybalt. He doesn't want to continue this conversation. He is trying to be polite and put space between this getting any bigger than it needs to be. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I can now that you've said that, I can see it now, because there's a point in time where those dashes occur where it's like he's trying to keep up appearances with the guests, like he calls for more light or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's those dashes that indicates that he's trying to
save face. I'm the host of the party.
Yeah, he doesn't want to ruin the party. He does say at some point he wouldn't have Romeo hurt for all the I can't remember the wording, but he assures that he doesn't want Romeo hurt because it would mess up the party.
Yes.
All right,
and
thank you.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, it's such a wonderful question. And I'm glad you brought that up, because when you're reading it, you do, we have these base rules for like what thee and thou can stand for, what you can stand for. But then that's what's fun if you look at the context of what Shakespeare's given us. So yeah, we're using this, but why in this instance? That's a great point that, he wouldn't be happy with Tybalt, but why is he forced to be polite in this situation? And it's because he doesn't want to have a fight at his party. So I always, those are wonderful questions. And I think they're really helpful if you use this for students or you point this out to students. It can help you figure out those relationships and emotions that characters are feeling with themselves as well as with the other characters that are in that scene. So thank you so much for bringing that up. We're actually going to, as I was saying, there's, and again, this is an exercise you can use with your students. And I find it to be really effective when you're trying to get students to understand those relationships. Is the exercise is, if you were to mark out the scene, every time someone says you take a step back. Every time someone says thee, you take a step forward, and you'll begin to see where those shifts occur and why, oh, wow, we're creating a lot of distance, or we're invading space, or, oh, here I'm stepping forward. Why might that happen? And so it's a good exercise. And I wanted to highlight that in the next scene. So this is Juliet and Lord Capulet, as we said, returning to the scene we were talking about, where she doesn't want to get married to Paris and she's defying him and he's very upset. I want you to watch Lord Capulet in this scene. He doesn't, strictly adhere to the exercise that I'm talking about, but I think you can see his movements with Juliet on certain uses of you and thou, and how he creates space with her. And so I'll bring up that scene, and I just want you guys to keep that in mind while we watch it.
Well, thou hast a careful father child, one who, to put thee from thy heaviness, hath sorted out a sudden day of joy, that thou expects not, nor I look not for. Madam, in happy time, what day is that? Marry, my child, early next Thursday morn, the gallant, young, and noble gentleman, the County Paris, at St. Peter's Church.
I'm just jumping forward a bit.
Come to father, tell him so yourself, and see how he will take it at your hand.
Ah, now what? Still in tears or ever more showering? In one little body thou counterfeits a bark, a sea, a wind. But still, thy eyes, which I may call the sea, do ebb and flow with tears. And now, wife, have you delivered to her our decree?
Aye, sir, but she will none. She gives you thanks. I would the fool will marry to her grave.
So, take me with you. Take me with you, wife. How is she none? Does she not give us thanks? Is she not proud? Does she not count her blessed? Unworthy as she is that we have brought so worthy a gentleman to be her bridegroom?
Not proud you have, but thankful that you have. Proud can I never be of what I hate, but thankful even for hate that is meant for.
How now, chop logic. What is this? Proud, and I thank you, and I thank you not, and yet not proud? Mistress, minion, yeah! Thank me no thankings, nor proud me, no proud. But fettle your fine joints against Thursday next to go with Paris to St. Peter's Church, or I will drag thee on a hurdle thither. Out, you green, sickness carrying, out, you baggage, you tallow, base!
I do beseech you on my knees. Hear me
I tell you what, get me to a church on Thursday, or never have to look me in the face. Speak not, reply not, do not answer me. My fingers itch. What? We scarce thought us blessed that God had rented but this only child. But now I see this one is one too much, and that we have a chance in having her. Out on her hill.
So for the majority of that, he does a pretty good job keeping his distance until he gets really mad. And so I just find it fascinating to watch him and how he creates that space, and kind of, projecting that context onto it. I find it really fascinating to watch him in that scene. And then what's interesting, as we said, in this scene, Lord and Lady Capulet have been using that very polite you with each other, putting them on the same playing field. So in Act 4, Scene 2, Lord Capulet switches and has this delight that Juliet has, apparently changed her mind, and she's happy to marry Paris. And he therefore discusses with his wife in the following lines: "Tush, I will stir about, and all things shall be well. I warrant thee, wife, go thou to Juliet, help deck her up." And so there's no evident change in the relationship with his wife that would, incite this shift. So it must be a shift in mood. And so that's another reason why you can have those shifts of you and thou, is changes in attitude. He's joyful, he's happy. Again, thee and thou is the close one. So he's getting close to his wife and he says, go help our daughter get married. And so it's important to remember the context as well as the words when we look at you and thou. And I think there is a perfect place to have a 5-minute bathroom break. You've handled all this language information so well. I know I've thrown a lot at you. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to give us that 5 minutes. So it's 6:27 right now. So we'll come back 29, 30, 31, 32 at 6 or at 7:32 your time. We'll come back. I see some glazed over faces. So we'll take a little 5-minute respite and I'll see you back again. Don't mad at me if I did that. There we go.
I have a question about married couples. So
yes,
You said that married couples usually address each other as you,
Yes.
but Romeo and Juliet, I think, are addressing themselves as each other as thou because they are lovers, or at least want to be lovers.
Yep.
So does that mean that in the sort of life cycle of a married couple, they start out as acquaintances and they call each other you, and then they become lovers and they call each other thou, and then they get married and they go back to you? Is that how? I mean,
so no, oh my gosh, such a wonderful question. So essentially kind of yes. You'll see in A Midsummer Night's Dream that fun tiptoey of like you and thou and you, because they don't quite know how to address each other. And then again, they'll share that close, intimate thee and thou, and so that shows a closeness. And then once you're married, when you see that shared use of you, it's essentially a symbol of respect. I respect you to be on equal playing field as me. And, we've done the union, we've done the courting, we've done the wooing, and now we are essentially a respected unit. And so that's kind of why you see that shift. Also, usually you see those married couples, they're older. And so you'll also see that status with their children. And so it's just kind of another way to differentiate those relationships. Does that make sense?
sure, yeah.
Yep. So, I mean, that's the fun thing when you kind of learn this and you learn the context and you pick and you go through the show and you're like, okay, they've been doing this, but then they switched, or they've been doing this the whole time. Why did they do that? So it's one of those additional things that I really like to use. And it can be really, and again, during Shakespeare's time, they are tuned into that a lot better than we are now. And so they would have picked up those shifts so quickly. It's just fascinating.
It's an interesting distinction, though, because I'm learning Spanish, and Spanish kind of still has that que usted differentiation.
Yes.
In Spanish, family members tend to go by chu, so they don't go back to usted when they get married. People would typically call their spouse chu, not usted.
Yeah. And so that's an interesting point. I don't remember what book, but it uses kind of that as an example of here's a language that we can still kind of associate that with today. And they do point out that Shakespeare interchanges the and you a lot more. And again, it's really kind of just to show those shifts in relationship. Status and respect are usually the things that I look forward the most. I'm like, am I respecting someone here? Are they of higher status? Am I close with them? Am I not close with them? Do I have to be nice with them? So those are all the kind of fun questions you can ask when you look for those words, but it's a wonderful point. All right, is everyone back? Great, Wally's with us, perfect. All right, so I know I threw a lot of language stuff at you. And so now we're actually going to be shifting to the theme of fate. So we're done with the language. Of course, if you have questions, let me know. And, just to cap that off, as we can see, Shakespeare's language helps us to unlock the motivations and relationship dynamics characters have, and these linguistic clues can often build on one another. And so now we will be moving to the theme of fate, and I will pull up my PowerPoint. So fate. Last class, we discussed how the play takes place during the summer in July, looking at how the heat influences parts of the play. We will now look at the astrological effects. Shakespeare lived in a time where people believed in fate and astrology's ability to direct the course of human life. Author Francois Leroc explains, what was then called the science of astrology was traditionally divided into two parts, i.e., natural and judicial astrology. Natural astrology was concerned with general planetary influences, such as those on nature and agriculture, or those on the human body in the medical field. Judicial astrology consisted in the relatively precise predictions derived from the respective positions and influences of the planets. And those were intended as advice to individuals. A nativity or horoscope was based on the map of the heavens at the time of a person's birth. The issues of birth and the calendar season throughout the play suggest that the characters' humors are completely dependent on the position of the stars during the summer in Verona. And so here we will do a quick little side exploration of the humors. Humors were how Shakespeare understood human personality. The 4 bodily humors were blood, bile, melancholy, and phlegm. The 4 humors caused the passions of anger, grief, hope, and fear. The humors were connected to the celestial bodies, seasons, body parts, and the stages of life. In Romeo and Juliet, yellow bile prompts the action of the main characters, who are presented as the victims of a foreknown destiny. By this early 16th century, yellow bile was the most common term for the hot-tempered humor. In the human body, the interaction of the 4 humors explain differences of age, gender, emotions, and disposition. The influence of the humors changed with the seasons, the time of day, and with the human lifespan. Heat stimulated action. Youth was hot and moist. Age was cold and dry. Men were considered hotter and drier than women. Yellow bile is associated with the season of summer. All very fascinating and fun stuff. There's actually a really wonderful website that does a deep dive on the 4 humors, and I'm happy to share it if people are interested, because it takes a lot of explaining. So in the play, astrology does seem to provide some sort of overall explanation as to the ill luck of the title characters, as well as for the various accidents and fortune reversals. The play takes place during the summer. Shakespeare altered the timing of the play. Instead of the Capulets' feast occurring during Christmas, which we see in Brooks's rendition, we've moved to the dog days of summer. As discussed in our last class, this allowed Shakespeare to associate passionate love and violence with these dog days of summer. So, and I do want to point out that, as we've talked about astrology and the celestial bodies and the stars real quick, that even the globe, I have an image here, their painted ceiling, the portion of the stage that is covered, has the 12 figures of the zodiac, and they do refer to that space in the stage as the heavens. So this is an image of the globe's beautiful painted ceiling. So continuing on, what are the dog days? So time for a little history. Ancient Greeks noticed that Sirius, which they dubbed the dog star, as it is the brightest star in the constellation Canis Major, they noticed that Sirius appeared to rise along the sun in late July. They believed the combined power of the stars, the sun and Sirius, is what made summer the hottest time of the year. Very fun, interesting fact. In the late 16th century, the dog days were calculated as extending from mid-July to mid-August. Sirius was regarded by the ancients as the near double of the sun, and was associated visually with the enormous gaping jaws of the Canis Major constellation. Sirius was described by classical astronomers and astrologers as positioned in the mouth of the Canis Major, like a fiery torch. This placement of Sirius at the tip of the constellation was also visually associated with a descent into the jaws or mouth of death. In the play, Romeo and the Montagues are even associated with this dog imagery. In Act 1, Scene 1, a dog of the house of Montague moves me. In Act 2, Scene 5, nurse, does not Rosemary and Romeo begin with a letter? Romeo, I nurse. What of that? Both with an R. Nurse, ah, mocker, that's the dog's name. Traditionally, the dog days were a time of dramatic climatic extremes. This ancient association of Sirius with seasonal extremes that could be fatal to crops also extended to humans. The appearance of the dog star was believed to introduce a period of exaggerated imbalance in the 4 humors. During the dog days, within Elizabethan culture, the general medical advice for July held a warning against overindulgence, overexertion, and medical intervention. Additionally, in Robert Watson's Almanac, dated 1600, it is written, "One must forbiddeth lust, hot spice, and wine." Medical recommendations stressed the dangers of these dog days, especially for young people and those who were thought to be naturally short-tempered. By situating the action of Romeo and Juliet in this part of the year, Shakespeare enhances the sense of danger. sorry. Stars in Shakespeare are often harbingers of disaster. The tragedy of Romeo and Juliet is governed by fate and the stars. And we see this in the chorus's prologue, the sonnet that we looked at earlier. Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Star-crossed, according to the new Oxford Shakespeare, means thwarted by the adverse influences of the stars. The term star-crossed links the workings of fate to the heavens, but fate is also linked to parentage. The star-crossed lovers are, from forth the fatal loins of these two foes. They are born to feuding families, being members of warring households. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. This passage references both their births and deaths, one after the other, again insinuating Romeo and Juliet were fated from the moment they were born. The stars and fate imagery are repeated in Romeo and Juliet. Here are some lines. Earth-treading stars that make dark heaven light, some consequence yet hanging in the stars. Two of the fairest stars in all of the heaven, the brightest of her cheek would shame those stars. Take him and cut him out in little stars. Is it even so? Then I deny you, stars, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars. This day's black fate on more days doth depend. To move the heavens to smile upon my state, the heavens do lore upon you for some ill. So smile the heavens upon this holy act. Another moment in the play that lends itself to astrological ideals is Act 4, Scene 1, when Paris speaks with Friar Lawrence about his marriage to Juliet. He remarks, "Venus smiles not in a house of tears." This phrase alludes to his ill-timed marriage to Juliet, who he believes is just mourning the loss of her cousin Tybalt, but we know is also crying for Romeo. Venus is the Roman goddess of love, and according to Katari's Fortune of Ancient Fiction, printed in 1599, the conclusion of urgent romantic affection inspired by Venus was marriage. This line also alludes to the particular influence of the planet Venus in the zodiac. No love, maybe we should not get married. Juliet's tears seem like a sign to Paris. The stars are a detriment of human fate. The stars, a detriment of human fate, symbolize the qualities of Romeo and Juliet's love. The continued use and imagery of the stars in fate gives the sense that there is nothing that can be done. The play's prologue appears to solely blame the stars and the ancient grudge between the families, to the extent that the lovers are victims of fate rather than shapers of their own destiny. Yet, what makes Romeo and Juliet fascinating is that Shakespeare challenges this conventional idea of fate with the idea of free choice. The play turns fortune into the challenger of everyday circumstances, which end up being obstacle to the young lover's happiness, and which push the plot towards its tragic ending. In Romeo and Juliet, the theme of fate overlaps with fortune, luck, or in the case of this play, the lack of luck. Romeo and Juliet face a string of obstacles. Author Elizabeth Fraser observes, Capulet brings the wedding forward by 24 hours, thus giving much less time for the message about Juliet's feigned death to reach Romeo and for Romeo to get back to Verona. Friar John, in any case, is prevented from delivering the first letter to Romeo in Mantua. Lawrence sends a second, but Romeo is already on his way back to Verona because his servant Balthazar has brought false news of Juliet's death. Lawrence arrives just after Romeo has taken the poison, too late to tell him about Juliet. Juliet awakes too late to see Romeo alive. In the world of Romeo and Juliet, fate is an accepted part of life and society, yet throughout the play, characters attempt to stop this invisible force guiding their lives. Even after Juliet receives the news she must marry Paris, she is determined to live her life with Romeo and goes to Friar Lawrence, where they plan to fake her death. Romeo, subsequently hearing of her death, refuses to believe it. Then I deny you, stars. He returns to Verona to investigate the news. Shakespeare shows how badly his characters want to believe that their desires stand a chance against fate. And with that, we're going to take some comparison looks at that opening prologue. So this is from the 2009 Globe version.
Alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge, break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventure, piteous overthrows, doth with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage, the which, if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend.
Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage.
And with that, and with that, we're on to our closing questions. I know we have 10 minutes left. It's been a long class, and I thank you all for sticking with me. I know I threw a lot at you today. So with those closing questions, is fate a threatening force or just an inevitable one? Who would like to start?
Well, I'm going to go with inevitable.
What was that, Wally?
I'm going to go with inevitable.
Yeah, I tend to agree in this one. Oh, I'm sorry. Elise, are you with us? Oh, technology is fun. Yes, Wally, I tend to agree with you for this particular show, especially because we have the prologue at the very beginning, kind of telling us what to expect. Any other thoughts? Is fate a threatening force or just an inevitable one? That's all right. I'll go on to the next one, which links back to that prologue. In the prologue, the audience is told how the story will end. A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Does knowing the ending change our reactions as we watch or read the play?
That's hard to answer or say now when you know Romeo and Juliet so well, you know, that it's synonymous with star-crossed lovers that take their life. But that's an interesting way to begin it. And I've read other books that you know what's going to happen, but you're going to see how it comes about.
I know. I think it's often, you know, I watch it and maybe I'm, you know, a hopeless romantic. I'm not sure. I still always hope for a different ending, but it does. You do feel, I think, a little sorry for them knowing that as much as they try, it might not work out. Elise, I saw you raise your hand. Jump on in here. I'm glad you're back with us.
I think, yeah, I don't think it changes the reactions. It's just kind of, if you haven't read it, you're curious to how it unfolds. So I think that just kind of, in a way, it doesn't necessarily take away from the mystery, kind of adds to it a little bit because, all right, I know the ending. How's it going to happen?
And I think for those that are being first introduced to it, there's also, you know, you have the first 3 acts, it kind of feels a little hopeful. And you wonder, but I know this is the ending. How is that going to occur? And then with every obstacle and everything that changes, you go, is this the moment? What is going to happen? How do we get to where we know the ending is? I think that's a wonderful point, is that sense of mystery of how things will occur. Any other thoughts on that question? Or I suppose even depending on the version you're seeing, I think that's the wonderful thing about Shakespeare is, we have the Globe 2009 version, which seems very, very Elizabethan compared to, even some of the 1996 version where, they have the word sword on the gun to, put up your swords, and we're linking that language. You kind of, I think with every version of Romeo and Juliet you see, you do kind of wonder, how are we going to play on this idea and how are we going to build off of it? And so with our last question, based on the information we explored today, specifically kind of in language, let's visit last class's question. Do we think Romeo and Juliet are in love, or is it just lust?
I don't think we have time to find out the answer to that. I think if they'd been alive in a month, we would have been able to answer that question. But
well, it's going to be the one I ask maybe every class. Yes, Mary, jump on in here.
I really trust that they love each other. That might be from loving the play and loving the characters when I was a teen, young. But I think that they are primed to want to love. And because Romeo says at one point that about Rosalind, well, she didn't want to love me. He wants somebody to love. And Juliet returned it.
Mm-hmm.
Juliet was willing. There's probably definitely lust in there too, but they wanted to find a person. And then, so I trust their love.
I think that's a good word, the idea of trusting their love. I think also, again, as we explored the language and I posed this question of just because they might be young and they haven't experienced, let's say, love, doesn't make it any less true. But that is also why I wanted us to explore some of those linguistic clues today with the language and how Romeo and Juliet complete that sonnet when they meet. I think the language enforces an idea that if not love, at least we know that they are compatible and that they do have a way of communicating with each other in a shared language throughout the rest of the play that does show, if anything, a mutual affection towards each other. Any other thoughts of love and lust? I know we have 5 minutes.
I would have changed away from my somewhat flippant answer before. I think the ending proves they are in love, because I could imagine killing myself in response to the death of somebody I was deeply in love with.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine doing that in response to merely the death of somebody I was just in lust with. So I think the fact that Romeo kills himself because he believes Juliet is dead, and the fact that Juliet kills herself because she knows that Romeo is in fact at that point dead, proves that it is true love and not some temporary fling of some kind.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? I know I said we're getting close to time and I'm happy to let you go. I know today was lots of information. We're going to be exploring some other themes next week. Elise, you still have your hand raised. Do you have something to say, or did it just get stuck? Okay, great.
Yeah, it was just something that Miss Mary had said that made me think back to the first question, the whole idea of Romeo wanting to be loved in return. And she mentioned Rosalind as well. And it made me think of your first question about fate. And I feel like it was when she said that about Rosalind, it reminded me that Rosalind is also a Capulet. So then goes back to his fate inevitable then, right? The whole idea that even if the love with Rosalind did work out and Rosalind loved him in return, is he then still have the same fate because he's a Capulet and no, sorry, he is
The Montague and she's a Capulet. I know. Warring houses, they're not supposed to be together. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like, do we have the same kind of conflicts, the same kind of secrecy, the same kind of events would kind of play out in the same way? So that was it.
No, I think that ties really well back to the idea of fate. And that again, Romeo just appears to at least like people that are not a part of his approved group of family, I suppose. So what does that mean for fate and who he's supposed to fall in love with? I think that's a really excellent point, because I think, you know, once he falls in love with Juliet, we kind of forget about Rosaline, but she was on the list to be invited to the Capulet party. So she's part of the Capulet camp. All right. Well, any other thoughts before I let you go? Thank you for sticking with it. Like I said, I know there was lots of language stuff today and I threw a lot at you and you all handled it really, really well. As I said, next class, we're going to take a look at Romeo and Juliet and the theme of love. So we're going to explore that fun love topic even further. Again, if you ever have any questions, you can send me an email. I'm always happy to answer. And other than that, I'll just say good night. Thanks for being here with us again on a Monday.
Can I make one quick request? Can you send out the URL for that website about the 4 humors?
Yes. Thank you so much. I will send out the 4 Humor website. As I said, it's laid out very well. They have a lot of different resources. Thank you for reminding me about that, because it is very interesting. All right. And anything else before I let you go? All right. Well, you've all been wonderful. I look forward to seeing your wonderful faces and hearing your wonderful input next Monday. Have a good one.
Okay. Thank you.